The important thing about what we're seeing in southwestern Syria is that a lot of commentators are suggesting this is the new Syrian state against the Druze minority that there is in there. But if we look at yesterday, a leading Druze figure, Laith Al-Balus, was on television, and he's the head of one of the more important factions. And one of the things that he said was that the violence that's tearing through Suwaida is not Syrian state against Druze. It's Druze against Druze, and it's Bedouin against Druze. And what's underpinning all of this are old tribal rivalries from different tribal factions that are there, but also criminality. These are groups that are involved in people smuggling, drug smuggling, extortion, and everything else in the area. The Syrian state, the new state, has got involved. As they were getting involved, a lot of the disinformation came out around showing Druze individuals being executed. The Israelis took some action against the Syrian State Ministry of Defense, and that has put pressure on the Syrian state to withdraw its security forces, both its military and its police, from the region, potentially tipping it into a continuation of this intertribal warfare that's going on between some very violent and very powerful groupings.
So on Wednesday evening, Israel engaged in bringing about a de-escalation by way of military force between the rising tensions that were very, very evident, that were the result of al-Julani dispatching Syrian military forces into the area of Suwaida. Suwaida is a very important city in southern Syria. It's actually there that in 1925, the modern day narrative of the Druze faith inside Syria was actually written and redacted. So it has particular significance within the Druze faith and the Druze community. And it's in that area that infighting began between the Druze community and the Bedouin community. And on the back of that, the Syrian military forces were sent into the area. Now, Israel was watching. It has said that it wasn't prepared for all of the border disruption that has ensued, but it was watching because it has a particular responsibility toward the Syrian Druze community as a consequence of the Israeli Druze community. After Israel took control of the Golan Heights during the events of the Six-Day War in 1967, it absorbed into its territory a large, loyal, beloved Druze community.
The situation is very confused. So, and people are nervous about the new Syrian regime because they're not sure whether they were going to go in and pick one of the sides and fight on behalf of one of the sides, and therefore use it as a way of ethnically cleansing the Druze out of the area, because they're more likely to side with the Bedouins rather than the Druze, because they come from the two different sides of the Muslim religion. The Druze being Shia and the Bedouins being largely Sunni. That's at the heart of a lot of the issues that are going on across the Middle East. We've got historical Sunni-Shia civil war that's being fought out by proxies. It's being fought out at tribal level, inter-tribe, but inter-country. But these countries have been artificially created by the West, at the end of very early in the 1900s, not taking into account all the tribal boundaries and everything else. And of course, it's the big backers of each side are Saudi Arabia and Iran. So that's why you get levels of complexity that it's very difficult for us in the West to understand. We love putting things into simplistic little boxes, putting a label on it and saying it must be this against this. And to a degree, the Israelis do that. There are both Druze and Bedouins inside Israel, and are Israeli citizens, so they've got voting rights inside Israel. So there's a degree of political crossover and wider political issues that could be behind why Israel has responded in the way it has. But it's confusing.
The issue of tribal factions in Syria is extremely complex. It's extremely complicated. Everybody should realize and recognize that the unification of Syria as a national entity came as a result of the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which drew out the country of Syria along very arbitrary geographical lines. But in actual fact, it's a very fractured society. Now, Israel has reason to be concerned about al-Julani's intentions with regard to the Syrian Druze community and indeed other communities as well. In 2014, al-Julani expressed that he felt that inside Syria there was absolutely no place, no space, no role for the Alawite community, the Christian community, or the Druze community. It's in that context that Israel is on high alert, particularly when it sees that al-Julani is deploying, as I said, tanks and APCs to the conflict zone, that conflict really taking place primarily between the Druze and the Bedouin, and Israel has no reason whatsoever to believe that al-Julani will be even-handed in his support for both of those sectors, the Bedouin sector and the Druze sector, and every reason to fear and be very concerned that al-Julani would set about killing and massacring the Druze community. Israel is right to be very cautious about this individual. Israel is right not to trust this individual. And Prime Minister Netanyahu has said that he will grant 48 hours for Syrian domestic security forces to act inside the area of Sweda, given that after an initial calming of the conflict on Wednesday night, tensions flared again late on Thursday night. But the Prime Minister was very specific when he said internal security forces as opposed to the Syrian military forces.
From what I understand, is Israel had given a deadline for the Syrian forces to be withdrawn. It has relaxed that deadline. So I think they are hoping that they'll bring a degree, the Syrian security forces will bring a degree of calm, or try and calm things down. But of course, they're watching it closely. So whether Israel thinks it's done something wrong in the way it's attacked the Syrian Minister of Defense, whether it was using that to send a clear message to say, you know, we're watching, we're involved, we will continue to get involved. Again, it's difficult to assess. You know, Israel is putting itself as a regional policeman, you know, with its actions not just into Gaza, which are justified against Hamas, into southern Lebanon against Hezbollah, which again were justified because Hezbollah should never have been there under United Nations Security Council resolutions. But you know, its interest into southern Syria might be one step too far.
As a result of that, Israel has repeatedly offered security guarantees, given the instability in Syria, to the Syrian Druze community. And it's in that context that Israel was watching to see what al-Julani's military might do in the area of Sweda. And what it did was it carried out, quite frankly, a massacre. There was a massacre that took place in the Sweda hospital with images that have come from there that are too horrific to have been broadcast. There has been a very significant number of humiliating images that have come out of the fighting there, including the shoring of the mustaches of Druze holy men, of Druze religious leaders, which is an act of profound humiliation and resulted in angering much of the Israeli Druze community. And Israel decided to act militarily at the point where it saw tanks and APCs being deployed toward the area of Sweda.
Almost certainly there are things that we are not seeing in the from an open source perspective and in the media, and therefore there will be more complex issues behind this, which is why I'm very reluctant to 100% criticize what's going on, rather than just suggest that there could be issues here. Clearly, Israel was detecting a degree of influence that it was not comfortable with, and it has taken action to do that. Whether that action was justified, whether that action will lead to stability or further instability, my gut feeling is saying further instability, but I may be wrong. There's just too much going on to be able to, you know, work a clear thread through everything. So it's one of those instances where I would be if I was doing a formal assessment against this, saying we don't have enough information to make a formal assessment, it could be this, it could be that, or it could be something completely different. Everyone's got cards, but again, with the level of uncertainty that there is going on, what cards he has to play, who he's playing them with, and what influence there is something we have to wait. This is one of these situations where let's wait to see what happens. I think activities over this weekend are going to be significant. Unfortunately, significant means there's likely to be a significant number of horrific deaths for civilians primarily. And that will allow those involved to get a better understanding of how they might potentially resolve this. But intertribal conflicts like this are something that historically it's nothing new.
I think Israel's come in for a considerable amount of criticism, including from our ally, the United States of America. America very much wants to see the brokering of some sort of an accord between Syria and the State of Israel. Now, the likelihood of such an accord being brokered obviously reduces when we have a dynamic such as the one currently playing out across the border between Israel and Syria. The United States asked Israel to de-escalate as Israel continued to enforce its red lines. And domestically in Israel, I don't think that there's a great deal of appetite at all for Israeli forces to be deployed into southern Syria in order to protect the Druze. I don't think anybody wants to see ground forces, for example, being deployed into that area. Now, that doesn't mean that it's impossible for such a turn of events to take place, but there isn't much domestic appetite for it.
I think we've only started to see the violence, and therefore, unfortunately, it is likely to spread. If the Syrian state can't intervene, and the Israelis aren't going to intervene apart from the air or anywhere else, then I don't see how this is going to calm down. And if the Israelis do intervene on the ground, that could exacerbate things even more. So, yes, I think we're seeing this part of Syria. It's a relatively small part at the moment, but it could spread because there are still different militias across Syria after the new government has taken over, that the new government hasn't managed to completely bring on side yet. And all it takes is a tiny little incident like this to start to blow up, to then stimulate other incidents across the state. That would be very difficult to control.
Since the uptick of this fighting, there's been an interesting interchange between the Syrian Druze, some of whom have infiltrated into northern Israel, and the Israeli Druze, approximately 1,000 of whom have stormed the fence between Israel and Syria in order to go and stand in solidarity with their Syrian brethren from the Druze community there. Israel has a very real concern about those who've infiltrated into this country because it cannot be sure whether or not those individuals pose a threat. They may be, for example, operatives of terrorist organizations who are hiding among the Druze population that came into Israel. Now, Israel has therefore sealed the border. It will not permit the crossing into Israel arbitrarily of anybody from southern Syria, but it has offered the following. Number one, it has sent a humanitarian aid package into southern Syria for the Druze community. Number two, it has set up medical facilities for the treatment of injured Druze and injured Syrians in the event that that is required. And it has also stated that it will continue to implement the security guarantees that it has dedicated itself to and obligated itself to for the Syrian Druze community. Again, that security guarantee being one of two red lines stated by Israel. The first is that the DMZ south of Damascus is actually enforced and recognized, and the second, the ongoing security of the Druze community in southern Syria. I don't personally believe that Syria in the immediate term can be viewed as an ally of the State of Israel, particularly under the leadership of al-Julani. Al-Julani is a long-standing jihadist, member of Al-Qaeda. He says that he has reformed. He says that he has changed his ways. He says that he wishes to unify his country. In my opinion, massacring 1,400 members of your own population and then sending your forces in order to massacre the Druze population inside Syria is not consonant with the words of wanting to be a unifier. So in the near term, I believe there's a lot of wishful thinking about the idea that al-Julani is poised to become an ally of the state of Israel, a friend of the state of Israel, and that the end of the state of enmity between Israel and Syria is upon us. I don't think we're in that position yet. I think that there could be, in time, some sort of brokering to the end of enmity between our two countries. Everybody in Israel would want to see that happen, but it has to be grounded in reality, a reality wherein al-Julani proves himself ready to be the unifier that he states himself to be, that he describes himself as being. And I have to say that his actions since coming into power are a far cry from his conciliatory words.